ここからはですね、お二人の今指定討論者のお二人のお話、それからそれに対してレスポンスという形で答えてくださったですね、ベンさんとケンさん、加えてですね、ここはもう AI が将来的には取って変わるところかと思いますけれども、頭がぐちゃぐちゃになっていますが、いい質問ばかりなんですけれども、とても30こうシークエンシャルにですね、順番にご紹介していく時間はありませんので、できるだけこううまくつまみ食いというかですね、まとめながらいくつか論点を出してですね、お聞きしたいと思いますけれども、まず一つがですね、いくつかあったんですけれども、この学生が自分でこう学んでいくためのこのインセンティブとかモチベーションというのはどうやってそれをこうつけるんだということですね。でこれは、多分ショートアンサーは、そういう最初からモチベーションがある学生を取っていると、ミネルバ大学はだと思うんですけれども、そうなんでしょうか。例えばそこで、途中で、自分でこう自主的にですね、京都大学の役が大変かもしれないですけど、京都大学の長年のこの学習観というかモットーはですね、対話を根幹とした自学自習という意味でですね、というのがあってですね、これはまさにこのミネルバ的には非常に親和性が高いのかなと、コンパティブルなのかなと思うんですが、そういう京大のこのいい教育文化の中でもですね、最近の学生さんはこう、日本の場合はこのエントランスエグザミネーションというのが非常にタフで、これはアジアのでは大きな問題でですね、韓国も隣にそうですし、中国もそうですし、とにかく高校の間にこうエントランスエグザミネーションの準備ばかりをしているから、いろいろなそのクリエイティビティであるとかクリティカル・シンキングということがですね、ないがしろに非常にそこのところが低く見られてしまって、故にいい大学に入ってしまうとですね、その学生たちは目標を見失ったり、もうそこで大学のブランドというのを手にしたことによって学ぶ意欲というのをですね、なかなか見つけられないということが、これはアジアに非常に強い部分だと思うので、ケンさんにもちょっとお聞きしたいんですけれども、その学生のやる気とかモチベーション、インセンティブスっていうことについてはどういうふうにミネルバでは考えているか、それともそういうものは全くもうそんなもん持っていて当たり前だというふうに考えているのか、そこのところをお願いします。
So there are three ways in which we focus on in making sure that the students are motivated and that they learn. So the first element, which I think is crucial to understand, is the classes at Minerva are very, very engaging. They're small, they're less than 20 students per class. You're going to participate in every single class. You're in front of your peers. There's, you need to show up prepared. And so, and classes go by fast. And so they're interesting for the students, they're engaged. And so it's not a chore, right? Being prepared for a class at Minerva and participating in class is really interesting. And so that's a big help in the design factor. The second is that we've structured the learning outcomes at Minerva to be cumulative. And so about 40% of the grade point average of a student is tied to their capstone project, which is their final project in their fourth year. It takes 2 years across. It both is a large chunk, the capstone project itself, but also the first year curriculum, which is a little bit more than 25% of your grade point average, is modified every year depending on how you apply the habits and concepts to different areas, and how you apply them to the capstone provides the biggest impact on those first year grades. And so if you don't learn in your first year, not do well, but learn, understand the concepts, you are not going to be able to succeed by the time your capstone comes around. And therefore there is an intrinsic motivation to be able to learn so that you can apply later on, because that's when you're assessed. And then the third is perhaps the most innovative thing that we do, which is employed almost nowhere in American higher education, and I hear quite infrequently in Japanese higher education, and that is that we issue Fs, which most universities don't do. And so if you don't come prepared, you will flunk out. If you don't do your work, you will flunk out. If you don't show up to class, you'll be thrown out. And we have no leeway. And so what most universities will do, for especially in the sciences, for example, which is the dumbest practice universities could possibly do, is they make their courses hard to understand and hard to succeed in. And so, you wind up giving these tests where the highest score is a 63, right? And the lowest score is a 20. But then what do? You draw a curve where the 63 out of 100 is an A+, and the 20 is a C+, and everybody else is there. And then you say to the absolute worst student, see, you shouldn't be an engineer, go away. But you don't flunk them out, right? And so instead, courses should be engaging. They should help students learn. They shouldn't be weeding them out. They should enable every student that has the capacity, right, and that has the motivation and energy to do well. But if the student does not invest, if they don't have the motivation or energy to be able to get through it, the university shouldn't tolerate it. And that lack of tolerance for laziness is really the most powerful motivator.
I was going to add a few comments about
please.
more local context to this, or regional
あ
context
と
to this.
ケンさんについてはですね、そのアジアでミネルバスクールズに学生を高校生をリクルートしていると思うんですけれども、彼らは特にそのアジアの受験ですね、その受験戦争っていうのがこのエントランスエグザムですごくタフなコンペティションがある中で、あえてミネルバスクールに行きたいと思うような学生っていうのに何かパターンというかですね、特徴があれば教えていただきたいの経験からですね。はい。
I'm going to guess what you said. And that's this, is because, I'm having lived in Asia for about 25 years. People will frequently, say to me, well, when it comes to motivation, or when it comes to, say, high school students, students looking to go to university, they're oftentimes motivated by other factors, right? Than maybe students in Europe or North America or other locations are. Certainly, human beings respond to incentives, and incentives can be different from culture to culture, from country to country. But what we have found is probably also not surprising. That is, there are motivated, highly motivated students and people everywhere. We all know that, just like there are highly intelligent, smart people everywhere. There are many smart people in Japan, just like there are many smart people in Australia or Pakistan or wherever. And because of that, and because they're truly motivated, even if they're incentivized to prepare for a national exam, right? And I'm very familiar with that because I've lived in China most of my adult life, and as we know, the Gaokao, the college entrance exam in China, in many ways like the one we have here in Japan, reigns supreme for many students in high school, as high school students can attest to. Most of us have been to high school, we know that, right? But again, the reality is truly motivated students from all over the world can and will find ways to just pursue their motivated interests, such that we have students from all around the world, including from this country, including from other countries in the region, many of whom who not only find Minerva compelling, but also are in a position, have committed, say, proof of motivation, such that they may actually achieve our very, very high standard. And I think if you look at the nature of our student body, right, probably about across the several classes that we have to date, about a third, 30 to 32 or 33% of Minerva students come from Asia, right? It's not surprising. There are many, many smart people here, right? The US or Europe does not have a monopoly on smart people, as we all know, right? So I think that if you look at the reality of the situation, it says a lot about intrinsic motivation globally. Oh, I didn't hear the. I didn't hear the translation for that. I'm sorry.
I thought you fully understand my Japanese.
No, I was
without
nodding
the
like I
receiver.
understand. So common characteristics of students from Asia is what you're saying. In many ways, very similar to the common characteristics of all our students everywhere. You'll notice that all of Minerva's students, not only do they develop a common language from their experience at Minerva, but they also come to the table. They come to Minerva with certain 共同点, with certain commonalities, right? And again, I spoke to motivation. Motivation, hands down, and demonstrated motivation. People who have written books, people who have founded companies. Again, 17, 18-year-old people, quite amazing. Certainly a high level of intellectual capacity, but also a high level intellectual curiosity. Before people come to Minerva, oftentimes even before they apply, right? We make it very, very clear, as Ben has said, that this is going to be hard, right? 50 hours on average of schoolwork per week, right? Again, this does not happen in university in the United States. And many of us who've been there, Kimura-san and I have also been to Harvard, Ben have gone to Wharton. This just does not exist, really, right? Except at Minerva. So people understand this coming in. Students understand this before they come, and certainly if they're not interested in that, if even after applying and actually meeting our very high standards for admission, they decide, oh no, I don't want this. This is going to be hard, and I just want to sort of sleep through university. And some students do want to sleep through university. Let's face it. Then we have to be very, very honest with them and say this is not a place for you, and that's fine. There's always a place for everybody, I believe. So other common attributes, again, not just for students from Asia, but for students from all over the world, in addition to this, probably a very high level of sort of independent thinking. Right? Now, they may not, because none of us in high school come equipped with this systemic thinking that Minerva is actually imparting, right? With these 100 and odd so habits of mind and foundational concepts. Really, nobody certainly has this full structure, right? But you'll see that a lot of students are of the nature that they're thinking differently about education. They want something different. I don't actually even know, when I meet many of these high school students from the region, from globally, I don't know how they know. They say, I said, why are you interested in Minerva? And some people will often say, well, because, I looked at Yale, I looked at Beta, I looked at Peking University, they say, and it just seems that the system is a bit broken, they say. It has some problems. I said, how do you know, right? It's impressive. But for people who actually are coming to the discussion and they've sensed this from the research that they've done, right? These are the types of people that may be a good fit for this model of education.
ありがとうございます。オープンエデュケーションですね、やってて、怖くなってきたところっていうのはですね、それはいろんな学生さんたちからもそういう声を聞くし、また僕もそう考えてきたことですけれども、自由にこのいろんなリソース、知識にアクセスができるようになると、本当のやっぱり勝負のところっていうのはやる気とかモチベーション、インセンティブが強い人間であればあるほど、勝っていくというかですね、ちゃんといくと、今ケンさんが言ったみたいに、そうでない、授業中にも寝てたい学生は、ミネルヴァはいらない、寝れないシステムになっているわけですけれども、そういう時代に来たと。でそれはオープンエデュケーションの自由に使える教材を使うかどうかという、そういう学生かどうか、学生ってのは別に高校生とか大学生じゃなくても一般的にそうですけども、そういう人たちかどうかということとまた通じていくものがあるということなんですが、今学生のですねモチベーションインセンティブについてちょっとお聞きして、なるほどと思ったんですが、実はもう一つ厄介なモチベーションの問題があってですね、ファカルティのモチベーションとか、向上欲とかトレーニングということなんですけれども、いくつかの質問をいただいていて、ちょっとまとめるとですね、論点としては2つあって、一つはそのミネルバで教えている先生、インストラクターズの方々にですね、さまざまなこの学習のデータのビジュアリゼーションのツールとかですね、いろいろ使っておられるんですけども、そういうものをきちっと使いこなす そのトレーニングっていうのはどうしているのか、またこういう非常に、ある意味で厳密で丁寧な方法で教えるということに関して、そのモチベーションという点、とそれからそのスキルですね、ティーチングスキルというかそのモデレーションスキルなのかもしれないですけれども、それから、いただいているのがさらにそれに関して評価、学生をですね適正に評価するのがなかなか大変だろうと。普通はこう、ね、最後に学期の最後にレポートを書かせてですね、それをこう A とか B とかつけるという評価だったらできるわけですけれども、そういうことをしないで、平常的なですね普段の授業の中でのパフォーマンスということをきちっとこのルーブリックとかそういうのを使ってですねアセスメントをしていくということへのそういうことをやらせる、そのファカルティですね。そこはどういうふうにされているのかと。給料が高ければやるっていうその答えもあるかと思うんですけれども、それだけじゃ回らない、動かないと思うんですけども、いかがですか。
Okay, I think I heard 6 different questions. Let me just very quickly address the motivation piece. There's one more thing which I forgot to mention, which is every aspect of what we do at Minerva in the classroom, fully active engagement, the way we structure, the way we do applications, we didn't invent the science of learning. We, in fact, are utilizing what has been researched for decades. And it turns out that all of the techniques that we use have the highest effect on the worst students, right? Because if you're already a great student, right, and you can sit in a lecture and get by and get an A+ on that curve, yes, you learn more in a Minerva environment for sure, but you can't get that much higher than an A+. And so in traditional experimentation, there's never been much proof that elite students actually benefit from our system. But in traditional experimentation that's been done over decades, not by us but by others, about active learning, the biggest impact is on the worst students, the ones that are least motivated. And so engaging students, showing them interest, providing classes that actually make them want to learn, etc., is incredibly helpful for people who we currently think of as disengaged or unengaged. So there's one aspect. Now, as far as professors, training Minerva professors is hard. It's actually interesting to get our students to take a class on the Active Learning Forum is about a 60-second training process. And we do this in our preview weekend. We say, oh, here it is. There's what this button does, what that button does, bam, and you can go and start in class. Training professors takes 5 days a week for 4 weeks, 6 hours a day. So again, 20 days, 6 hours a day for each one of the 20 days to get them ready to teach a Minerva course. Now, it's not all the technology. In fact, that's a relatively small portion of it. The majority of it is the way that you conduct and manage a fully active learning class and the way you assess. And so we assess at Minerva fully based on rubrics and exactly in the same way that you are assessed in the real world, which is namely in 2 areas. Number 1, you get assessed on how you talk and interact with other people. People judge other people by the way that they interact and what they say in meetings and social occasions, etc. And so what that means is that the professor, after the end of class, will go back and review the class at 1.5 times speed and actually mark students' comments and give them rubric-based grades on a scale of 1 to 5 on each one of these 100 or so habits or concepts, and in upper-level courses, not just on habits and concepts, but also on learning objectives, on the content of the class itself, the purpose of the class itself, and on work product. So generally, there are about 4 to 5 assignments per school, per semester course per that the professor grades in the same exact way. And so rather, so think about how we usually get graded. Let's say you were to write an essay for a class and you hand it in. What would the professor say? A minus. Why? I don't know what an A minus means. What does an A minus mean versus a B plus, right? How do I know what's good, very good, somewhat good, right? It's very unclear, and it's very hard to understand what the grades mean. On a rubric perspective, in your assignment, a professor will tag every element of the habits and concepts, learning objectives that you were supposed to deploy, and say, okay, you clearly don't understand this one. You understood this, but applied it in a very regular way. You had a profound insight in this one. And by the way, you transferred it into a totally different dimension. So you not only get graded on this 5-point rubric scale, you also get graded on whether or not it has no transfer, near transfer, or far transfer. And it creates a very comprehensive overview. And then they'll give you overall points, for example, on the way that you constructed the argument and the flow of the work, etc. And of course, this is the way that we get assessed in the real world. We get assessed by what we say. We get assessed by the work product we produce. We really never in the real world go to our jobs and our boss comes to us and says, okay, I need your phone and your laptop. I'm going to lock you in this room. Don't make any phone calls. Don't look up anything. I'm going to ask you 5 questions. You have an hour to answer them, and then I'm going to keep you back. Right? This is an absurd way of testing or teaching, because there's nothing in the real world, perhaps except the driving test, that approximates this. And so this entire idea of testing a particular constrained knowledge with a correct answer, can you recall the right answer, is absurd. You can look up the right answer. Far more important is, can you apply answers and concepts, drawing together, right, ideas that aren't just regurgitated to you, but where you can think about, well, oh yes, I should actually connect this fact and that piece, which is again what we do day to day. And so that's how we assess.
ピアアセスメント、学生同士のピアアセスメント、学生同士のピアアセスメントっていうのは、たくさん利用されます。
Yeah.
今、先生がこう評価するっていう話が中心だったと思うんですけれども、学生もそういうスキルをですね、このピアアセスメントのスキルっていうのを育てていかなければいけないですけれども。
We don't use peer assessment much. We use a lot of peer back and forth in class, obviously. Students interact all the time. But peer assessment is really best when it's done at scale, where you can get rid of the noise and the outliers. And so we don't generally do too much peer assessment in that regard. We do utilize a lot of peer assistance, and so students help one another quite a bit in and outside of class and preparation and like.
そちらのケンさんもちょっとお聞きしたいんですけれども、指定討論者の2人の方から何かここまでのところで、コメントとか追加のクエスチョンっていうのはあれば、なければ進みますか。はい、大丈夫ですか。はい、じゃあケンさん付け加えることがあります。Anything to add?
No.
Okay. 時間がだんだん迫ってきてですね、緊張しますが、いい質問が多いんですね。一つはですね、これも複数の方からいただいてますが、京都大学のですね、経営管理の先生からがよくまとめてくださっているので、その先生の質問をちょっと使わせていただきますが、リベラルアーツ教育の在り方ということですね。でそのアメリカでもそのリベラルアーツ教育がですね、あまり良くなくなってきているのではないかと。ただそういうヒューマニティーとかソーシャルサイエンス的なことが中心にですね、重きが置かれて、やればもうやったというやればやったというですね、ことになってきて、そのリベラルアーツというのを再構築する、それを ICT というこの技術を使ってですね、 やろうとしておられるのでしょうかと、そのミネルヴァでですね、つまり、ミネルヴァがやっていることがトラディショナルなですね、リベラルアーツ教育というのと違うのであれば、それは何かというのが、はい、そういう質問です。
Yes. So what's fascinating is the liberal arts education in the United States is not popular. It's extinct. It doesn't exist. Funny enough, though, every university you've heard of, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, MIT, Caltech, Williams, Amherst, etc., every single one of them claims they provide a liberal arts education. So it's extremely popular because every American student believes they're getting a liberal arts education, even though no American student has received a liberal arts education, in my estimation, about 50 years. Right? And so this is the crux of the problem. The problem is that people don't know what a liberal arts education means. In Asia, and I can probably have Ken talk more about this, people believe that a liberal arts education means an arts education, studying poetry, the humanities. The humanities is nothing to do with the concept of the liberal arts. It's a component, right? You have to actually be able to communicate effectively and have interpretive capacity. That's important. But it's a very small portion of the classical definition of a liberal arts education, which again is the idea that you should be trained in the various arts or fields of society such that when it is time for you to govern or make decisions on behalf of others, you can do so effectively. And so in ancient Roman times, that meant that you had to learn both the rhetorical arts, how to make effective argumentation, as well as things such as crafts, what we refer to today as engineering, philosophy, what we refer to today as science, mathematics, which we still call the same thing, etc. And so the idea of the liberal arts education is that it is very broad, right, and that you can use it to study really anything else, which theoretically every university claims to do, but most do not. And that's really the big difference between what we do, which is we really provide this broad general education, which you can then apply to the majors and concentrations and other courses that you take in your upper level years at Minerva.
Ken, anything to add? はい、あとですね、大事なのは、君さんのお話とも関係あるところですけれども、このミネルバで出た、まだ若い大学で、so you have graduated. Are you going to have or you already?
2 more years.
2 more years. まだ、その実際に卒業生が出ていないので、そこは分からないんですが、どういう進路またはその業界分野にですね、人が送られるか、またそういうところから好まれて採用されるかということについて何かパースペクティブをお持ちですか？それともどういうところに送りたいということがありますか？
Great. Yeah. Well, we don't have perspective. We actually have data. We actually have data of what students actually have been doing. Even though we will not have graduates until 2019, we have had a very high percentage, I'll talk about that in a minute, of our students have been doing very meaningful internships, right? Both research and internships with companies. Some during the term time, but usually we're talking about full-time working during the summer breaks. Right? And this is interesting to consider. So here we've been saying that we have put together this model for education that bridges the preparation gap. So Yamamoto-san said earlier about this preparation gap, right? That 96% of universities believe they're effectively preparing students for the modern world, and only 11% of employers believe it. That's a serious gap, right? So here we're saying Minerva is actually bridging this gap in a very meaningful and effective way, right? But you may say, okay, show me some evidence of such, right? So let's talk about some actual data. Now, we have had, to date, 3 intakes of students, which have recently been combined into 2 classes, you consider it this way. So we've had, we have students who have just finished their first year, we have students who've just finished their second year. And if you look at what they've been doing, we've had almost 90%, 87% of Minerva students, after their first year, that's after they're beginning their freshman year, their first year at university, right, have undertaken during their summertime, right, and our summer holiday is 4 months long, and it's like that on purpose, so they can actually dig in deeper to whatever they decide to do. Again, everything Minerva does is intentional. So 87% of Minerva students after their first year participate in internships. And some of those could be Science and Research Institute internships, like I mentioned at the Santa Fe Institute, or at the Stanford Design School, or at Caltech. Some of them, probably most of them, have worked for companies, for-profit, non-profit. Some have worked for the government. Some have even worked for Minerva around the world. Right? That number in itself is very, very high. Right? If you look around and go to an Ivy League institutions in the U.S., other top colleges in the U.S., it'd be very rare, if not probably impossible, to find that many of your post-freshman students engaged in meaningful activities or career work activities in the summertime. Right? Also interesting is that at the end of those experiences, at the end of those summer experiences, we have actually taken care to poll, to actually assess their performance through their employers. So naturally, we want to know, we were interested in seeing if this is working ourselves, right? And we said, we're going to see what actually employers have to say about our students. 2 other interesting pieces of data. First of all, 90%, we asked employers several questions. One question we asked them, we said, rate Minerva students, compare our Minerva students, who again have just completed 1 year at Minerva, compared to all of your other university interns, which usually means students who have done 3 or maybe even 4 years of university, right? Students who are maybe rising juniors, rising third years, or usually rising seniors, rising fourth year students. So Minerva students are being compared with students who have had maybe 1, 2, or 3 more years of university. And we asked employers, we said, do Minerva students perform, right, just as well as these other students? Maybe, do they perform not as well, just as well, or did they perform better, right, than these other students, right? 90% of employers said Minerva students perform above the level that they would expect of any undergraduate interns that they've had, right? The remaining 10% they said perform at the expected level, right? And then perhaps the most interesting piece of data is we also ask our employers to rate our students using an NPS score, so Net Promoter Score, which I believe is a common marketing metric that a company may use to gauge satisfaction with a product or a service. So Coca-Cola, for example, may ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, would you recommend our product? Would you recommend Coca-Cola to your friends? Which is seen as not only an indication of how satisfied you are with that product yourselves, but if you would recommend it, right, to someone else, it's a further measure of satisfaction. And again, this is an NPS score is ranked from, I guess you could have a 0 NPS score, but usually from 1 to 10, right? With 10 meaning I would definitely recommend, 1 meaning I would not recommend. So of the dozens of employers that have responded, right, so far, Minerva has to date what is referred to as a perfect NPS score. So every single employer who has employed a Minerva student, right, has either answered 9 or 10, right, which is considered again a perfect Net Promoter Score. We would definitely, not only would we take another Minerva intern, and the ones that say that they continue to do so, but we would also recommend Minerva interns to, you know, someone else in another division in our company, maybe even another company or such. So it's interesting, even though it is still early and Minerva doesn't have full graduates, if you look at the feedback from, I don't know, the market, employers out there, including some in Japan, the feedback and the affirmation of the effectiveness of what we're doing He's actually pretty amazing.
Sounds like we can't wait 2 years. あと2年間ね、2 years、そう待てない感じで楽しみですけれども、はい、ありがとうございました。最後の質問ですね、京大法学部1年生の岸本君ですね、僕のオープンエデュケーションの初年次ゼミを取ってくれるんで、ちょっとひいきしてますけれども、学生代表ということで、アンダーグラジュエートのフレッシュマンなんで、大事かなと。ただこの問題質問はですね他の方からもいただいてます。ミネルバ大学は何かっていうことですね。ミネルバ大学は岸本君の質問。ミネルバ大学は大学の3つのこれは要素というか研究教育社会貢献研究教育社会貢献ですねのうちの、教育については分かるんだけども研究と社会貢献についてどう考えていますかと。それについて、ベンさんに聞きたいということですけれども、なかなかタフな質問だと思いますけれども。
Sorry, just to get the translation. What is our view of for research and for contribution?
Yes, so three main functions we usually see.
Yes.
For the universities: research, education, and the social contribution.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, how about research and the social contribution?
So. On social contribution, this was actually the easiest one because it was the inspiration for Minerva to begin with. So this course that I mentioned earlier that I took in my first year as an undergraduate about how the history of universities and how they relate to society, they are that point of that course was to show that the universities should be better neighbors, be a better citizens of that city and all the rest. And I thought, yes, of course, every institution in the world should be a good citizen, but universities' real contribution to society is the research and education that they provide. If they do those two things extraordinarily well, that's the biggest possible impact that they could have more broadly. And so Minerva exists, our mission is to nurture critical wisdom for the sake of the world. We believe that if we enable an ecosystem that enables and nurtures critical wisdom more broadly, we will save the humanity's role in the world. The planet itself will be fine, but we on this planet may not be. And so that's the contribution piece. The research piece, we think research is crucially important, but we think it's also important to separate, especially from an accounting and cost perspective, the research function of a university from the educational function. I think the intermingling of funds between the two causes very, very bad behavior among institutions with highly misaligned incentives. And we think that research needs to be funded for research. It shouldn't be taking undergraduate tuition and funding research with it, or vice versa, taking money away from research in order to subsidize undergraduate education.
So can you say where you stand, where the Minerva stands is more like a UK Open University, for example?
It's actually much more like the Cambridge and Oxford. So at Cambridge and Oxford, even though Cambridge and Oxford use research funding to subsidize a little bit of undergraduate education, not that much. But in general, Cambridge, I can speak for Cambridge for sure, they have a very clear understanding of the cost to educate an undergraduate and the cost of research, and they have a very clear demarcation of where the funding goes in each regard. And the research stands on its own. Research funding pays for all of the research requirements at Cambridge, and any delta would come from a donor which is specified for research.
はい、ありがとうございます。その大学もこれからどんどん形も役割も変わっていくと、変わらない部分もありますが変わっていく部分もあり、その中でこのミネルヴァのようなですね、新しい形の高等教育のシステムのあり方が投げかけていくものというのもあると思います。もう時間ちょっと少し過ぎていますけれども、最後まとめるというかですね、終わるにあたってですね、ぜひお一人1分ずつ just 1 minute per person お一人ずつですね、まずその指定討論者のお二人からは、ミネルヴァ大学に今後期待することといきなりそう言われてもと困りますけれども、1分間ですね、期待したいことということをお一人ずついただければと。それからミネルヴァ側のお二人からはですね、今日学生さん特にたくさん来られてます。今日聞いて京大を辞めてミネルヴァに入ろうかな思っていると困るんですけれども、ミネルヴァ大学に関わりなくですね、今のその若い人、それからできれば先生たちにもですね、何か励ましのエンカレッジメントをなんか一言いただければと思いますけれども、じゃあまず君和田さんからお一言、それから松先生お願いできますか。
そうですね、今日は本当に貴重なお話をありがとうございました。ビジネスのこのプラクティショナーの視点から言うと、本当にミネルヴァで育つような方々が世に広く出ていくことを私たちも非常に期待しています。ですのでミネルヴァの学生さんの数今限られていますが、今日のような取り組みを通じてミネルヴァの実際に今やっていることをオープンに広げていくことで、他の大学にでもですね非常に良い影響を与えていただいて、この世界全体の高等教育がより良い方向に向かっていくことを大きく期待しています。
ありがとうございます。松下先生お願いし
ます。私の中ではもう本当にファウンデーショナルコンセプトを身につけさせる、そしてそれをいかにいろんな場面で使わせるようなカリキュラムを築いていくのかっていうのが本当に印象に残りました。でベイさん自身の講演の中でも教育とはどういうことなのかっていう、まさに本当に根本的な問いから始めてこの大学を設立された、まさにその自分で体現されているわけですよね。そういう思考法を取りながらこういうふうな新しい大学を作っていかれているっていうことがとても刺激を受けた点です。
ありがとうございます。じゃあケンさん次。
I believe that you are all here because in some way you are dedicated to education, curious about education. And so I'd encourage everyone to think not just about what university, college, right, is, but what it can be, and in fact about what it should be. And then actually join us to help achieve that goal.
ありがとうございます。じゃあベンさん最後に。
I just want to first and foremost thank everybody for all of the excitement and attention and engagement on this topic. I truly believe there's nothing more important for the world than to get universities to live up to their full potential so that they can help everybody else that goes through, both professors and students, do the same. And so engaging in this conversation, engaging in this dialogue is a crucial step in that process, and I really want to thank you for it.
Thank you so much. あっという間の4時間足らずですけれども、本当に有意義な時間だったんじゃないかと思います。パネルに最後ご登壇いただいた皆さんもちろんですが、午前中にですねお話しいただいたミネルヴァの山本さん、それから本学の田口先生、酒井先生、そしてもちろん君和田さん、松下先生ですね、そしてミネルヴァから本当に針の穴に糸を通すようなタイミングでですね、これがシンポジウムが今回実現できたんですけれども、いろいろな点でご協力いただいて、また非常に貴重なお話をですね、まだこのオンゴーイングのですね非常に壮大な教育実験と教育社会実験 というところですね。我々もこれからミネルヴァからに注目し続けていくことはもちろんですけれども、ぜひそこから何か学び続けてですね、またこの大学としてお互いにできることがあればですね、ぜひ一緒に何かやっていきたいなと思う次第です。それから皆さん、お忙しいところ最後までお付き合いいただきましてどうもありがとうございました。最後に登壇それから参加者の皆様へ自身のですね拍手ということで、それからいろいろ手伝ってくださった本センターのスタッフの先生方、若い先生方、それからスタッフの皆さん、どうもありがとうございました。じゃあこれで閉会とします。ありがとうございました。